Welcome back to another episode of the Liberated Woman podcast. I'm so happy that you are tuning in once again for some more nuggets of feminine wisdom. And today I have a special guest. Her name is Katie. She's a women's empowerment coach, an author, a book coach, a psychic, and a motivational speaker. To date, she's written 9 books of her own and helped 12 women to write and publish their books. She's passionate about supporting and uplifting women wherever she can. Welcome, Katie, to the podcast.
Hi, Shani. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm so excited to be here. It's so cool.
Yay. So, Katie, maybe just tell us a little bit about where you started with this book journey of yours that's now led you to coaching other women with their writing and their books and getting their voice heard through the power of imagination and writing and getting it out and published. So yeah, where did you start with all of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I wanted to be a writer since I learned how to read. I'm an only child. Books were my life. And I really thought I could, like, secretly, and I say secretly, wanted to be a writer because my self-esteem was crap. I had like lower than low. And I really didn't think I was good enough to pursue my dream, but your dreams don't go anywhere, they just sit in you and get louder and louder. And actually, it wasn't until I gave birth to my twins in 2012 that I was a stay-at-home mom for 4 years. And of course, had nothing else to do with my time. So I thought I may as well try and write a book.
Mm-hmm. So what was your first book about? What was the inspiration?
It was about spiritual awakening, because my spiritual awakening happened in 2010 and changed my life completely. And so I've always written about what I'm experiencing in that moment. I always write the book that I need to read. And so I almost wanted to kind of process what I had been through and what I was still going through. And so actually, it's also the only novel I've ever written to date so far as well. But it just was able to make sense of it all in some kind of way. And did really well. I mean, considering I self-published it, actually ended up winning the Soul and Spirit Book Awards.
Amazing.
I know, it was kind of crazy, but yeah, I am really proud of it, and allowing myself to finally go after the dream that I kind of been sitting in me since I was about 4.
So would you say it was like your soul desire, like something that was bigger than you, right? Like your soul desire is something that is bigger than your being. It's something that lives like really deep, I think as a woman, like lives really deeply within the womb. It's kind of like an idea that impregnates you and like plants this seed, and then you can't escape it. You can't escape the growth of it, and it will just grow bigger and bigger until you birth it into the world. And so that's really beautiful that this dream of yours came from that place and not from the place of the mind where you thought, I'm going to be a famous author so that I can have loads of accreditation and people will know me and I'll be famous, but more coming from a place of like, I desire this like deep within my womb, and I've known it since I was a child. It's bigger than me.
Absolutely. And I knew that because when I actually allowed myself to engage with it fully, it flowed beautifully. Like, it wasn't a thing of like, writer's block and stop, start and push and all this. It just like it poured out of me like water. So it was waiting there for me to catch up and align with it, so absolutely. And the thing is that, and I really believe that when you don't listen to those inner callings, they do get louder and louder, until the point that spirit will just put you on your ass and make you listen, the tower moments of life. So I mean, my spiritual awakening was one of those tower moments, but I still could have ignored the call to write. And I'm just happy that I didn't get a tower moment with that as well,
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think when you've got like a soul calling or a soul desire that lives within you, and like I said, I think it's bigger than you, like it's something that channels through you. And you said like it poured out of you like water. I love that analogy, because I think when something is bigger than you and comes from that place of soul and not from that place of ego or mind or should, or I need to be this to prove myself to other people or to show the world that I'm credible and that I'm worthy of being an author or whatever it is that your desires are. Like when it comes from that place of channel and soul, like it will just pour out of you like water, because it's yours. It's meant to be yours and yours alone, and it makes you unique, and it makes you it's part of your soul path on this earth as you tread it. So I think that's really beautiful that that's how your first book really kind of birthed into the world and burst onto the scene, so to speak, not to use another water analogy, but it's kind of like, yeah, I just like burst onto the scene, right, as a way of you stepping into your power, and into your purpose of what you're here to do. And now you coach other women with writing their books. So kind of, was that like a natural progression from your writing of your own books?
Yeah, I mean, it took my best friend to kind of point it out to me. So it was last year, it was only since I've started. And my best friend lives in Florida, and she is a recruitment of teachers in schools. So a very, very busy job. But she really wanted to write this book. And because she told me I'm a bit of a gently, lovingly kick you up the bum occasionally. So I would mention it every now and then. How's it getting on? Have you started? And she went, "Oh, Katie, I'll just pay you and you can do it." And I was like, "What?" And she said, "Well, I've done some of it. So if I give you the rest of the notes, can you put it all together and then like self-publish it for me?" And my ego flared, not in a good way, because I went deep into imposter syndrome and deep into fear of like, who am I? But actually, her trust in me allowed me to have greater trust in myself, that she believed in me enough to hold that space for me to step forward into this new purpose. And actually, I mean, don't get me wrong, I have to say it's a number of books that I've gone through so far, and none of them have ever been like completely, it's a whole journey with each client. And so, stuff comes up, and it depends what the book's about, and it can trigger and it can bring up healing that needs to be done, and even the publishing process can be difficult, but it was much easier than I had led myself to believe. And once I did it and with her, and then she got the book and she was just over the moon. She was so happy, and I thought, as I always do with these things, I want to do it again.
Yeah, of course. And it is that, like, again, it's like a purpose that maybe like started as the seed of you writing your own book. And you said an only child, and I books for my life, and I was in this imaginal realm, and of course you're in the imaginal realm, and then your spiritual awakening comes online, and of course that starts to pour through you and channel through you. And then it's like, well, I have a greater purpose now I can serve other people with my gifts, because I'm able to then empower other people to publish their books, because I know how to do it. I've done it. And like, this is what I want to birth into the world, like to support other women to birth their soul desires into the world. So it's kind of like this beautiful ripple effect of like your little seed has kind of germinated and grown, and now it's like pollinated other people's desires too. It's really beautiful. And like, what would you say has been your greatest kind of moment when you, through this kind of book weaving journey of yours?
And there's been a couple. There's two that really stand out for me. One was one of my clients won an award for her book, which I felt like such a proud mom. I was so emotional because I knew how much it meant to her, and she was emotional, and that made me emotional, and it was so beautiful. And then the other one was a lady who'd been writing her book on and off for a long time, and it meant so much to her because it was her memoir of her own spiritual journey. And it became a #1 bestseller on Amazon in 2 categories. And to have other people validate her and her journey and her story, and say how much it was helping them and moving them, and to be a part of that for her was just, I felt really honored and humbled. I felt like it was so much more than just, hey, let me help you write your book. It felt like so much, it was a deeper connection with her than just that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was like trying to say before, really. Like when a desire takes over you like that, it is bigger than you. Like, you don't even know it necessarily. You can't even necessarily see the bigger picture of what it's creating, or the ripple of that. But like, like what was planted in you then rippled out to her, and then it was rippled out to other people, and it will continue to ripple out in that way. And that's like, it's a really beautiful kind of feminine way of like bringing something into the world that's not from like the mind and the masculine, the patriarchal views of like, I need to, and I should, and I have to, and in order to be, I must, like it's coming from a really natural, creative, flowing space, which is really, really beautiful. And I've been part of your book publishing. I've written a short story about my journey
Mm.
in one of your books, and that was it. That was a whole experience, actually, even for me. If I may just share a little bit about that, actually, it was, you run an event once a year called Rise, where you get women who've had all sorts of different challenges and stories in their life to come up and share their stories with other women. It's very inspirational. And I was one of your speakers. I think it might have even been like one of your earlier events. I'm not
Yes.
sure how many events you'd run at that point. And yeah, like to write down my journey it was tough. Like it was really hard for me to articulate that into words because so much has happened.
Mm.
My spiritual awakening journey, my feminine awakening, so many kind of layers and pockets and pathways, and you can't fit it all into a 20-minute speech. And then when you take that speech and you turn it into something that's going to be in a book, and I remember like reading it out loud the first time to my partner and like getting really emotional about it because there was a lot that I was like, oh wow, like I actually went through that and I lived that and I overcame that and I navigated that and I alchemized that, and that's actually a lot. So it was a really beautiful process, very difficult journey, even just to write like a short chapter in an anthology of other people's stories, but it's on my shelf. I've got it here, read the stories. So that was pretty special.
I always say that women's stories matter, and I really believe that deep in my core. And I think that it helps the teller of the story and the listener of the story. It is a mutual beneficial process. For the teller of the story, you release the shame that was never yours to carry in the first place.
Mm.
Okay. And for the listener of the story, you are providing a roadmap out of their own challenges and trauma.
Yeah.
So it is a mutually beneficial thing. And as women, we can feel very isolated and very separate. I know both of us have felt that in moments of our journey thus far. And so to hear other women's challenges and trauma and pain, but not only all of the heavy stuff, but also, okay, well, how did you alchemize that? How did you transmute that? How did you lift yourself up? Becomes deeply inspirational because you realize there's a way out of your own. And it's not like I have to copy you, but if you've gotten yourself out of your darkness, that means that I can get myself out of where I'm at because we're sisters, So I really believe that more women should really own their story and stop feeling so awful about what they've been through, because most of it's not, 99% of it is not your fault.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like Maya Angelou that said there's no greater tragedy than a story untold. Like I think she starts I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings with that line. And it's like, it's a really powerful line because, she told her story of being a marginalized woman of color in the era of segregation in the United States and all of the trauma that she went through with that. And it's really inspirational. And like, you can just learn so much from people's stories. That was her memoir. Like there's just so many stories that you can learn, and stories are the is sound and stories and words. It's like the original essence of the world. Like we were birthed through story. Like we weave stories, and stories have been told around the fires and through cultures and tribes and nations and countries and religions, and this is like common thread, and stories live on and they change and they evolve, and like we can tell ourselves stories that aren't true, and we can live stories of our own that we want to break down those stories and like come into the essence of who we are maybe underneath those stories, and like come back to our true soul and come back to our true purpose and who we are and our truth. And so that's a really beautiful journey, and I was really grateful to be a part of that because it definitely challenged me. And I don't think I'm a natural writer necessarily. I prefer speaking to writing, so it was kind of helpful that I did it as a speech that I then turned into a piece of writing, although I did write out the speech. But it definitely helped that I like said it out loud as well, because that's, for me, that's like my magic is in my voice, not really not in my penmanship. I can write, but it takes me much longer. I'm a bit of a perfectionist, recovering perfectionist. So writing is harder for me than speaking. But yeah, that's a really beautiful journey. So what would you say, like, going back to your spiritual awakening in 2010, because then you said you had your children, your twins, in 2012, which was probably like another layer on top of that. maybe just share with the women listening, or sometimes I have men listening to this podcast too. So big up to the masculine, because I've had messages from men being like, I'm really inspired by your podcast. So that's awesome. But yeah, for whoever's listening, maybe just share kind of a little bit about your journey with your spiritual awakening, and maybe, you know, how you knew you were going through a spiritual awakening, because I think a lot of the people who, like, my most popular episode on this podcast so far has been my journey to spiritual awakening. It's the most amount of plays, and I think that's like their stories that people want to connect with, because they've been through something similar and they want to feel like they're not alone. So yeah, maybe just share a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to start before it to kind of understand where I was and then why it happened and then the outcome. So before 2012, 2010, life was happening to me, right? So I was like without compass, without sail, without rudder. I was just adrift in life, and just being the wind was taking me wherever. And I was desperately unhappy in a lot of ways. And I very felt like there was a hole in me that I couldn't fill. You know, I was a high school teacher, and I was going from crappy relationship to crappy relationship. I was partying. I just couldn't, I didn't feel whole. And my self-esteem and my self-worth were like, I suffered with chronic low self-esteem for years. And you wouldn't know it to look at me, because on the outside, I was this gregarious, funny, confident woman. But on the inside, I was like wobbly jelly. And I really didn't value myself at all. And then in 2010, we had the most awful family tragedy when my grandparents were essentially killed in a fire in their home. The mobility scooter was set on fire outside their front door, and they didn't die in the fire. They died the next day in hospital from the smoke. And then we had, obviously, as well as the shock and the grief and the trauma, we also had the police investigation, and we had the media camped at the end of the road. So it was, to say it was a tower moment in my life is complete understatement. It floored me, and everything kind of stopped, because when you've been through grief, you know that life does kind of stop, especially something that traumatic. But it also gave me a real period of reflection about my life and myself and who I was and where I was and how unhappy I was. And I was left in this kind of in-between space, which everybody hates, because like there's no, like, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what's going to happen next. I just know I'm in this kind of holding space. And enter stage right a friend of my mum's who was a psychic medium, who's no longer with us, the lovely Barbara. And the first words out of her mouth to me when she met me was, "You can do what I can do, you know." And I was like, "Excuse me?" Like, I
saw
can't
you,
do.
like she saw your soul. She knew.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I kind of dabbled a little bit in like the paranormal when I was younger, but not seriously. You know, like most teenagers do. You know, you find the esoteric shop and you're like, "Ooh, witchcraft, ghosts, ooh." But I never kind of really got into it in a big way. And she was great. I mean, she really helped me initially to develop my my psychic ability and brought that out. But as she brought that out in me, it was like things just started to happen. And I know it sounds so cheesy now to say it, but you know those like in a movie where like the colors are brighter and like they're like you have this real like appreciation of life.
It's like someone turned the saturation up on the filter.
Yeah, I suddenly feel like I've been turned on, and not in a sexy kind of way, but I was turned on to life. I was
But
turned on to
actually,
myself.
I would argue that that is like the sexy way, because why are we not turned on by life? Like life is eros, and eros flows through us, and eros is everything. It's like color and food and smell and taste and texture and people and sounds and music and dance and movement and all of it. So like, yeah, like to be turned on by life is probably the most beautiful thing. And I would argue that most people are very not. They're the opposite of turned on by life. They're actually very turned off by life, because they've lost contact with their true essence, and they've lost contact with their desires. They've lost contact with what brings them joy. They've lost contact with like their gifts, whatever their gifts may be. Yours and mine are, you know, to be psychic and oracular, and you know, like, yeah, when those gifts come online, you do feel more turned on, because you're like, wow, I have a power that like has always been there, but it was suppressed and oppressed and
Yeah.
feared by the patriarchy. And now I'm like finally feeling brave enough to bring it back online. So yeah, like I would argue that actually like eros and being turned on is like by life is sexy. Like the whole thing is part of it, right? It's all
Yeah.
juicy.
I hear you, and I actually agree. I think it was so much more. I want to say a spiritual awakening almost isn't enough of a term. I feel like it was an awakening of complete self. I felt like I literally aligned. I mean, the other thing I think is important to know is that spiritual awakening is not a one-time dealio.
Yeah.
Nuts. And people get a little bit disheartened when they hear that, but there is a thing called ascension, and that's what it is. You go through multiple awakenings as you grow and you develop. And so that was the first one. And then of course I was so hungry for knowledge and wisdom, and I was just like, teach me everything. So I mean, thank goodness at that point that I found Hay House books, because I was just like devouring them like daily. I was just like, just teach me everything. But it wasn't like the magic pill that made my life suddenly better. It wasn't like, okay, I'm happy now, everything's fine now. If anything, there is the thing, the dark night of the soul. And for me, that's also a misnomer, because it wasn't one night. It was a period of time where, because I still had all of my trauma and my insecurities and my fears and my shadow. And actually, I mean, obviously, we still go through that. It's a lifelong journey. But I would say that this full alignment of this version of myself hasn't really come online until last year. And actually, I feel more my truest self, and the full acceptance of myself has only happened quite recently. It's been because a huge part of my journey was learning how to love myself. And that actually took a lot longer, because it was so deeply core wounded, and it took a long time for me to get there. And it's of course it's still a process. It's still on, as that's a lifelong journey too.
Yeah.
But
tell me a bit about that, because like we titled this episode around like why self-love is like so important, and like where to start with that self-love journey. So for you, it was, I guess, part of your spiritual awakening was this journey back into self-love. So yeah, maybe share a little bit about like what you did to come back into that place of self-love to be where you are now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's having this awakening, you are learning how to accept yourself for who you are. And so, of course, that then, let's say, the shadow naturally comes up to the surface of like, this is why you're crap. This is why you're ugly. This is why no one likes you. And you have to deal and heal, right? Deal and heal. And I was sitting on the sofa, like I won't go like something dramatic happened. I was just watching TV, and it was 2016, and this thought just plopped in my head out of nowhere. And to other people, this thought would be like, yeah, well, obviously. But for me, it was a massive, huge thing that changed everything. And the thought was, you are okay as you are. And it floored me, and I'm sitting there like the Cheshire Cat, just grinning like an inane idiot. And my husband at the time was like, you all right? And I'm like, I'm really good.
I'm okay, just as I am. It's like in Bridget Jones, the film where Mark Darcy says, I like you just the way you are. And she's like baffled by the fact that someone would like her just the way she is, because she's like, I'm an incompetent idiot, and I babble on, and I'm overweight, and I smoke too much and drink too much. So it's like for someone to reflect that to you, it's like your own reflection. It just reminds me of that moment in the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I don't want them to go, oh, well, then I love myself and everything clicked into place. No, that was the door. And then I'm like, okay, now we have to explore this space. And so one of the first things I did, and one of the first things I encourage people to do, is take their butt to the mirror. And I know this is an audio, but there is a mirror behind you, which is a wonderful synchronicity. I was somebody who spent minimal time at the mirror. It was very functionary. So I would obviously blow dry my hair or put my makeup on, but I would get my butt away from the mirror as quickly as possible, because it's so personal, you and your reflection. There is nowhere really to hide from that space. And I knew that, okay, well, if I'm going to learn how to love and accept myself, I need to start with that. So initially, and mirror work is something that Louise Hay has talked a lot about. She's done a whole thing about it. But initially, when you go and sit with your reflection, it's so uncomfortable that I either wanted to run or I wanted to laugh because I felt so stupid, or I just felt very emotional. And I almost had to be very stubborn in that I would make myself sit through that. I would make myself stay, even if I was like laughing my head off, or I was blushing, or I felt like I wanted to cry. I would, and my skin wanted to like crawl off my body. I made myself stay, like a stubborn child, sit, wait, because I knew that if I waited long enough, I'd get to the other side, which I did. It took some time, I'm not gonna lie, but I got to the other side of that, whereas I just came into a place of being with me, with myself. And once you get into that space and you look directly into your own eyes, you start to go down through the layers of who you are. So we start with your roles in life. I am a mother. I am a wife. I am a daughter. I am, that's your first layer. Then you go down into you as a woman, or if you're a man watching this, obviously, but you go into your sense of self in your body and who you are. If you sit there and wait, eventually you come down to your core and you realize that you are love. And it's actually a beautiful. I was so emotional. I actually ended up marrying myself in 2016 because I felt like it was a really important thing. I had abandoned myself so many times for other people and always put them before myself. And I knew that it wasn't about marrying yourself is not a legal thing. It's not about other people. It's not like I can't get married if I ever want to legally to somebody else. It was about my relationship with myself. And so I went back to the mirror by candlelight and I sat with my reflection again. And I said to my reflection vows that I had written that I would stay true to myself and I would never abandon myself again. And I would accept myself for all that I am. And it was very emotional, but it was also very beautiful. And I stand by that time. I think that everybody should really think about the relationship you have with yourself, because people come and go in life. It's just the nature of life. But you can't escape you. It doesn't matter where you go or what you do, you take you with you. So is it not worth trying to have a better relationship with yourself? Because if you don't, and believe me, from someone who's been there, done that, and got the t-shirt, when you don't have a good relationship with yourself, it impacts in a really crappy way because you draw people to you who mirror it back at you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, like you'll just attract what you think you're worthy of or what you think you deserve, right? And like you can try and manifest all that you want, but you will generally get what you need, not what you want. When there's a vibration under there of like, it's like going, well, I want I don't know, whatever it is that someone desires, the really lovely house with the swimming pool. If that's your desire, it's not particularly mine, but if that's somebody, I'd love a massive piece of land where I can live with all of my community and have my wildling children running around free. That would be my desire. But whatever it is, it's like there's the desire, like I desire to love myself, and you can say it out loud as many times as you like. But if in the core of your being you don't believe that, or lots of that, or there's resonance there, or there's emotions attached to that and stories, it's not going to happen, right? Like there truly has to be a process of like the armoring and shedding and going through those layers, like you said, in order to truly find the essence of who you are. And that's like your soul at the core of you, a core of you. And I think so many people like use the word abandoned, and I think so many people have abandoned themselves for kind of like what we spoke about at the beginning of this episode, for like the glorification or for the ego, or trying to prove yourself to your mum and dad or your teachers or your partner or your ex-partner, being like, look at me, look what I'm doing now, haha, sucks for you, you missed out, like whatever it is. Like I think a lot of people kind of abandon themselves to give an impression of themselves to the world rather than truly tuning into like, who am I at the core? What is my soul calling for? What is my true desire? What is my true purpose? Like, what is the essence of me? And I think like you articulated it really beautifully when you were like, well, the essence of me is love. And like, if everything is love, why would I not then like tune into what that desire is for me to exude that love into the world? And for you it was like your books, and like then supporting other people with the books. And like for me it's been like for to allow women to be seen, heard and witnessed, and to create spaces for women to gather together and to create awakenings and journeys for people to feel safe and transform. And it's, we all have different desires and purposes and what we came
Of course,
to.
absolutely. But in life, there's only ever two choices in everything that you do, from the relationships you have to the job you have to even what you're going to have for your dinner. You are choosing love or you are choosing fear. That's it. That's what it all boils down to. And I have lived in a place of fear for a long time, and it's not fun. It's dark and it's scary and it's fearful. It's not fun. So if I'm preaching all this stuff about empowerment and self-love and self-worth and sisterhood, why am I not walking my talk? It's hypocritical of me to guide other women on what they should be doing, and I am not doing it for myself. So for me, choosing love was like a real, like, well, duh, obviously, but we all get there. Divine timing, I think, plays a huge part, and I think for me, I had to get there because I had to go through what I went through beforehand before I got to that point.
Yeah, and I remember at the last Awaken Your Inner Goddess event that I ran in Norwich, my friend Aurora, who's the pelvic priestess, like she did a beautiful activity with us, a kind of a workshop with us, and the main question she asked us is like, what do you choose to be your reality of love? And I think it's like that constantly coming back to that, like if it's about self-love and empowerment, it's like, well, what do you choose your reality of love to be? Like if love is this essence, and I know it's so easy to say that and like to live it is something else, but like, what do you choose? And you're right, you can't always choose it. There are circumstances that happen to us, like what happened to your grandparents in the fire. Like there are circumstances that happen beyond our control, but then you get to choose within that, right? Like always, even when it feels difficult. And grief is the other side of love. So that's probably why you had such a like an epiphany around that time, because like grief is just how deep you love someone. Like your grief is how deeply you loved. So, and that's grief for anything, right? Like the planet, the world, people, relationships, people, whatever, death, like grief of yourself, a part of yourself that died, like whatever it is. So yeah, I think that's a really beautiful space to end. I love to always ask my podcast guests one final question, and I know you'll love this question. And that question is, what does being a liberated woman mean to you?
That you can live beautifully, wildly, authentically, without apology. That you stop saying sorry for yourself. I put a post on yesterday on social media about women say sorry constantly for just existing. I'm sorry, this is probably a really stupid idea, or this is a silly thing to say, or I've got this idea, but it's not really like. We apologize for just existing. And when you do that, you're giving other people the message that there's something to apologize for. There's something wrong with you, in inverted commas. And we need to stop doing it. I mean, don't get me wrong, if you've done something wrong and you've hurt somebody, say sorry, own up to it, take accountability. Don't apologize for just existing. And to be truly liberated is to free yourself from those shackles and say, I am here and I take up space and I am proud of who I am. And if you don't like it, that's your problem. It's not mine.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Katie, for coming on the podcast. May you all feel more inspired as part of your self-love journey. May all of you feel more empowered, and to know that you're not doing this journey alone, that there are so many women out there on this journey to liberation, on this journey to awakening. We all have our own paths. You have your uniqueness, you have your soul's calling. It's there. It's just calling it to courage. Like it's just the call to courage to bring it out and to listen to the whispers that are inside of you that are going, listen to me. Like I want you to birth this into the world. Like this is my true desire, and it's resonating through your body in that way that you describe, like the pouring of the water. And we spoke about like eros and it flowing through life. And I think that's just like, that's part of the liberation. Like when you can remove all those blocks and those fears, you said choose love or fear. Well, if you can remove the fear and choose love, like then we get to really fully liberate ourselves and be living in those desires. They're no longer desires because we're living it. We're like, wow, I am it. I am love. I am living it. I'm not desiring it. It's not this like thing that's far away from me that I can't do. I am it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think that's a really beautiful space to end today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Katie. And for the rest of you, I'm wishing you a beautiful, magical day. Have a lovely week. I'll tune into you next week for another episode on the Liberated Woman.